Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from Floozy Cheeks. Need an address? Sure thing, Mr. Border Security. Let's jump right in. Short time lurker, first time poster, hope this fits here. So this happened around 2015. And I just want to preface this with how I could have avoided the encounter, but my friends and I were idiots. The first big international holiday I embarked on was with my two friends from high school, and we were journeying to Mexico to visit a mate first, and then fly into the United States to finish the trip. Once we were done with the first leg of our journey in Mexico, we had to fly into the US to New York via Houston. Our plans had us staying with another friend of ours in New York, and she had told one of our friends her address, but not the rest of us. When we arrived to Houston, we had to fill out the generic border form before passing through the checkpoint. I filled out all the details I was able to, then came the section where it asked the location you were staying at in the US. I asked my friend what the address of our stay was, and he told me that you didn't need to put that down, so I believed him. Come time to line up through the several checkpoints where agents are checking passports, I joined a different queue to my friends, probably a mistake, where I was eventually greeted by a stain of a human. There's some slight differences in syntax with how I found American spoke, which led to some initial confusion. One of the first things the agent asked me how much money I had. I asked if he meant physical cash I had on me. He replied yes, so I told him about $50. He then condescendingly told me I wasn't going to get very far with that. So I then apologized for the confusion and told him I had a few grand in the bank, enough to enable me to safely travel the US for a few weeks. He then asks me the address of where I'm staying. I tell him I don't know the address, but that we're staying with a friend in New York. He says that's not good enough and won't let me through. I see my friends have passed through the gate, so I tell him that my friends know the address and ask if I can go over to get it from them. He says no. I then ask if they can come back so I can get the address from them. He again says no, and says to go back into the waiting area as I won't be let through until I can put down the address of where I'm staying. At this point, I'm thinking, what the F does this guy expect me to do? He's not gonna let me into the US until I put down an address he won't let me find out? There was a barrier to the side of the booths where I tried to get close enough to my friends to find out what the address was, but another security agent quickly put a stop to that attempt. The advice I was given was to call or message my friends, but I currently had a Mexican SIM card that had no signal and no internet. I told the agents this, and they offered no solution. Also, there didn't seem to be any Wi-Fi in the airport at the time. I was basically stuck in purgatory until I had an address, which I had absolutely no way to find out given my current circumstances. I was terrified I would miss the connecting flight or be denied entry and sent home. I eventually went to a kiosk where the first nice person I had met during the encounter was working behind a computer. I asked her to look up hotels in New York City, and she showed me a list. I picked a well-known hotel chain and just entered a random hotel name and address onto my form and chose a different queue to line up in. I was very nervous that they might ask to see a reservation as proof before they let me through, but hallelujah, they let me straight through. The second checkpoint I went through was way more chill. I had a feeling that if I chose any other checkpoint, I would have been fine. I just happened to pick the one run by a stain. But I made my flight to New York and had no further issues. No real fallout, but thankfully, I didn't get blacklisted or sent home. So that's the story of how I lied on a customs form in order to gain entry into the US. Yeah, OP, your friend's the butthole. Oh wait, sorry, wrong subreddit. But truly, your friend is the butthole because they should have given you the address and given it to everybody else who was traveling with you before you even got off that plane. Actually, before you even got on the plane in the first place, you should always have an itinerary so you know exactly where you're supposed to be. Because what happens if you got separated from them for some reason? This story to me just sounds like a whole bunch of bad planning. Let's move on. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from BlackScorp84. Let an ex-elected official call the cops on himself. Let's jump right in. So, several years ago, I worked as an unarmed guard for a security company that was contracted to watch over a new construction site for a large wind farm. This area was hilly, rural terrain with lots of wind, perfect for this kind of project, or so I was told by the many contractors on the project. It was also popular with hunters, both local and not. The possibility of pew-pew holes in equipment being the primary concern, followed by a long distance by theft. The property had an old dirt road running through it that had been previously open to anyone wanting to use it. This part becomes more important later. I had been working this site since they broke ground on construction and never had any issues until a roll of copper wire was stolen. Our company had assumed that anyone trying to do anything on the site would use the heavily improved road through the site. They were proven wrong when that spool went out the back road. The only other access road that met up behind the property was nearly impassable for anything but four-wheel drive trucks, so had been considered unimportant beforehand. Needless to say, we moved to 2 guards minimum overnight, one at the main entrance and one patrolling the site. The other change was that the company who owned the project decided to require every person entering the site to have a badge identifying them. Due to the popularity with hunters, it created some issues due to this road now being the smoothest and quickest way to the backside of the property. The hunters would come and go, but the people who owned cabins behind the property were more regularly seen throughout the year. It was one of these owners that became the biggest problem. He was proud to flaunt the office he had previously held and adamant that he had an easement to drive through this property to get to his. It may be different in other areas, but here, an easement, ability to drive through somebody else's property, is given if there's no alternative route available. With there being a road that led out to the public roads from the back of the property we were guarding, this wasn't the case here. The company we were contracted with was actually pretty reasonable with allowing access, no money involved, and just some personal information, identification. For this particular individual, that wasn't good enough. He made a routine of speeding past the guards and refusing to stop. So a gate was installed and kept shut short of the construction crews starting and ending shifts. One of the other guards let us know that he was trying to get a ticket or get arrested so he could take the owner to court. My luck would have it that he chose one of my shifts to try and run the gate. This shift being a midday on a Sunday, with the crew having come in for overtime to fix something in one of the nacelles, the large box behind the blades that had been flagged during testing and couldn't wait for repair. Honestly, not too sure what was going on with that end. With all of that in mind, this gentleman drives up and starts yelling about accessing his property. We have his picture, so I already knew who he was. I pretended to not hear him clearly, giving me enough time to start using the gate in front of him. This is not a fancy electric gate, it's a steel cattle gate that you have to walk open and closed. As I start shutting the gate, he starts driving forward, so I stop and stand in front of his truck and let the gate swing back open. He tells me to move out of his way, to which I responded that I know he won't risk running me over because he knows he would lose what he is trying to gain, free and unrestricted access through the property to his. Seeing that I have the advantage, he decides to try a different approach. He made a comment along the lines of just blocking the road until I let him through or call the cops. I bluffed a little in telling him about the crew working on site and said I wouldn't do anything about it, but since they were on overtime on a weekend, I wouldn't stop them from doing whatever they needed to do to be able to go home, which led to him pushing to get the police involved. Now is where we start to get into the malicious compliance. I was given explicit instructions not to call the police on him because all that was wanted was for him to come back during the week to get a pass, which I told him repeatedly to no avail. He decided to keep pushing the police getting called, which I kinda started to find funny the more he talked about it. He went from simply saying I should call them to more in-depth pushing. He asked if we had a phone in the guard shack, which we didn't. He asked if I had a cell phone, which I lied and said I didn't, which was more believable considering they hadn't gotten very popular yet. He then said he did, but didn't want to call 911 since it wasn't an emergency, and asked if we had a phone book. Still not sure why we had one, but it was there. He even tried to get me to call the sheriff on him on his own phone, which I again refused. Not ready to give up, he took it upon himself to call the sheriff's department on himself. Satisfied that the police were on their way, he moved his vehicle aside and allowed me to shut the gate. It was about 30 minutes before the first deputy arrived, since it was a weekend and a remote part of the county they served. Being the security guard, they approached me first. I told them what had happened and that neither my company nor the property owner had an issue with him or what he was doing, as he was outside the gate and not blocking anything. The officer shook his head about this guy calling them in himself and walked over to talk to the ex-elected official. It's about this time that the crew that was working came down and asked what was going on and had a quick laugh before heading back home or wherever they were staying. In all, about 5 officers responded to this call, and each one gets a laugh about getting a call like this one. It must have been a slow day for them to have so many show up for this joke call, and then take another half hour to 45 minutes deciding how to handle it. In the end, they gave him his ticket for falsely reporting a crime or something along those lines. To which I hear him yelling out his window as he drives off that he got his day in court. The officers who had yet to start leaving laughed and said, yeah, he will get his day in court, but it's not going to be the one he thinks he's getting. Have you ever noticed that some people just get so angry that they can't think rationally and they don't see the consequences of the actions or even what their own end goal is? I was glad to see that OP, the security guard, didn't get over agitated in this situation and just let the guy dig his own grave. Epically done. Our next story today comes to us from X-Riceland. I have to tell people their results are delayed through no fault of our own, but not tell them whose fault it is? Okay, I won't tell them. Let's jump right in. I started writing this as a comment on the post about being blacklisted by a moving company and having an employee suggest they take them to court, then realized this may contain some useful information for others as well. As a general rule, contact and support employees can only tell you what they are allowed to tell you, but some will always try and stretch that in a way that helps you more than the company. When an employee tells you to consider the legal route, that may be because they know from experience that only the people who do that get what they want from this crappy company. Now, about my malicious compliance story. I've worked chat and email support for a company that handled certification for various technology, IT for various companies mostly, and language-related degrees. The companies that held the actual exams were supposed to send us the candidates' answer sheets either by scanning or by mail. Some of them chose the mail option for some reason. They were multiple choice answer sheets. Scanning would have worked fine, which meant results would be delayed for weeks until we received them. Also, unhelpfully, our company policy mentioned that results become available after 48 hours, failing to disclose that it meant 48 hours after we have received the answer sheets. This led to a big number of people coming to us and asking why their results were delayed. But icing on the cake, our company wouldn't let us say that the delay was due to the company that held the exams sending them by mail. So what was supposed to happen is, customer asked, "Where are my results? It's been 48 hours. We say, "We will have them within 48 hours of receiving your answer sheets." They say, "But it's been this many days or weeks," or "I talked to X exam company and they said they sent them and talked to you," and we kept repeating the same response like robots. So what I did was give them a simple piece of advice in addition to the usual message over chat. Since you're not getting a concrete response from either side, write one email, put both companies as receivers, and force them to give you a response while holding each other accountable at the same time. The result was pretty funny, honestly. Most people's response was, "Huh? I think I'm gonna do that actually, thanks." And shortly after that, we would receive an email with the exam company CC'd, asking why their answer sheets weren't delivered and when their results would be ready. We obviously responded with, "We have not received your answer sheets yet. We will have your results within 48 hours after we do," leaving the other side forced to answer why we haven't received them. As you can imagine, learning that their results were delayed because the actual sheets of paper were being sent from mostly the India or the UK to Greece, that's where our headquarters were, made people very angry. And not only them, but also the companies that hired them, who were usually the ones sending their employees en masse to get certified on new IT-related standards and had been led to believe that these delays were unavoidable. Sadly, I left the position before I could see the full-scale results of my actions. Though my supervisors expressed their displeasure at my actions before I left, they couldn't exactly penalize me since I didn't break any rules, which felt pretty good. But I believe some of the companies hiring a big chunk of the test takers in those countries started sending them to a competing exam hosting company instead, which also used my company for certification. So my actions didn't harm my employers, only the people who thought it acceptable to mail easily scannable answer sheets in 2019. I can only hope that it kept going on after I left. On a brighter note, in the span of 1 month, I got a better paying job at an equally crappy company, left that one exactly after my paid training ended, and moved to Norway to study at a university. Hopefully, I won't have to work support for crappy companies anymore. But others will, and maybe they don't like being dinks to other people, so keep that in mind when you contact them, and see if they're not trying to help you covertly. To me, it just seems incredibly dumb and archaic to send things by mail that could very easily be sent by email. I'm guessing a bunch of the higher-ups at the other end on this one were older people who just don't trust the internet, and they've always done it this way, so they'll just continue doing it this way, regardless of who it screws in the process. Our next story today comes to us from Iran Ball. Do you want your forgery documents sent to court? Sure, let's jump right in. I work at a translation office. Our job is basically to translate official documents, work certificates, academic degrees, medical papers, etc., to be used in other countries. The whole service is controlled and monitored by the judiciary, and we are based under the direct supervision. My boss had to be directly certified by the court. Some countries also require our translation to be double certified by the local court and/or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's pretty routine work most of the time, but since these are official documents, there are a lot of rules we have to follow, like what documents can be issued at official translation and how much we are allowed to charge, down to the smallest pennies. My boss is usually a super cool guy and does all he can to help people who come in, sometimes even refusing pay from people who can't afford it, even though he still has to pay the tax for the income since it gets registered in the system. Now, this is actually something my boss did. I fully agreed with him, but it wasn't my call to make. Last week, some guy, let's call him Mr. X, comes in and brings us a bunch of documents to translate, including work certificates, his academic diploma, and transcript of his grades, and some other stuff. He brought them in 2 batches, so by the time we received the second set of documents, his first was already translated and double certified by the court and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His grade transcripts were in the first batch, his diploma was in the second batch. This will be important later. At first, he refused to give us his diploma, saying that his mother had hidden the documents to prevent him from traveling abroad. Not the strangest thing we've heard, so whatever, but we kindly informed him that we are not allowed to issue a translation of copies and have to at least see the original document. So does the court and the ministry. So he goes and gets it a couple of days later. Now, I was the one in charge of his translations, and the moment I picked up his diploma, something felt off. It was too heavy. I actually had to check several times to make sure it wasn't 2 or 3 documents stuck together. A closer examination showed that a post stamp attached to the back was not real, but instead a copy. Strange. I called my boss since now I'm sure this is a forgery. He comes, checks the document, but it's really strange. These documents have forgery prevention measures like holograms, UV light sensitive prints, and seals, and most of them are in order except the stamp on the back and the fact that the photocopy looks strange. At this point, I just suggested calling the cops and letting them deal with it, but my boss, the good guy that he is, didn't want the guy to get in trouble and said it wasn't 100% sure, more like 90%, so he had someone bring it to the court to check, but instructed that person to be discreet, get their opinion, and get out with the document, not to leave it there as evidence. So they did just that within the hour. The document was back in our hands with a suggestion from a court official that we should probably treat it as a forgery. Hearing that, my boss decides to get the fake diploma to the guy and send him away, as long as he brings us the translation we issued for his grade transcripts, which was for the same course as the diploma, so was also probably fake. He even offered to pay back the money he paid. Just get the translation to us, get your things, and go be a criminal somewhere else. Pretty lenient if you ask me, but it's his business, not mine. The next day, we get a call from the local court asking us why we're refusing to send the document belonging to Mr. X to the court to be certified. Turns out, the guy had gone to court and filed a complaint against us because we refused to do his work. So now my boss is pissed and does just as Mr. X wanted, sends the forged diploma to the court. They, of course, immediately can tell it's a forgery, they seized it, opened an investigation against Mr. X, and now he's on the hook for multiple crimes, some of them with serious jail time. The court also asked us to give them the serial number for all the documents ever translated under this guy's name. Everything, including ID documents, work certificates, everything, so that they can contact all embassies and warn them about the possibility of forgery, which probably means the guy will be blacklisted in every country that matters. My boss made some excuse at first about not having all the serial numbers ready, but then Mr. X came in Monday with his father and issued some strange threats. So the next workday, all the serial numbers were at the court. We also didn't have to pay his money back. And to think, had he just done his ass, he wouldn't be on the hook for so many crimes, and he would also receive a full refund. I would still call the police personally, but I have to admit, this was more entertaining. I'm guessing this guy had spent a lot of money on these forged documents and really didn't want to lose that money. That's the only reason I could think that he would still try to push them through. I guess some people don't know when to shut up and leave things alone because it's what's good for them. Check out all 4 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.